things. They don't have to be managed. They raise the bar themselves. What is it that differentiates them from good teams? Any fool can tell the difference between a super team and a bad team. We wanted to know what differentiates those that really excel. And one of the sidebar studies we did found that the significant difference between sustainably successful organizations is the caliber of its management and leadership. But we wanted to understand, well, what did that look like? And what we discovered very early on, and if you click on Speaker View, you'll see me full screen with the slides in the corner. What we discovered is that there's a really important issue, which is this issue of respect. What we realized was wherever we looked in the world, when a company, when a team, when an individual loses respect, they actually lose followers, they lose power, they lose in all senses. And typically what we found was in teams where respect was low, stress was high, well-being was a challenge. There was issues around attrition, there was issues around retention, there was issues around motivation. And then what we found was that it's actually something very simple, that within organizations there are two viruses and only one of them is COVID-19. The other one is the micro behaviors that we see, and there's a concept called the broken window or the broken glass syndrome, and it says it's a metaphor. If you see a building and you after a while what happens is one of the windows gets broken. Nobody knows why it happens. Nobody knows who did it. What we now know is if you don't fix that broken window very quickly, if you don't metaphorically call it out, very rapidly, lots and lots of windows get broken. And what happens is these micro behaviors become viral. And what we found is that in organizations, leadership and management behavior becomes viral. And in some of the big workshops I run, we talk about a company in the US where a CEO took over a failing company, turned around the financial fortunes, dramatically improved their profitability, and then within months the company started to fail again because employee morale went down, top talent left, people became disillusioned. And it was all traced back to the individual CEO's micro behaviors. He'd rush in the morning and rush past. He didn't know the name of any of the junior people, what he considered to be the resources who did the utility stuff. Yeah? He rushed straight past his PA, straight to his PC, handled all of his email before he spoke to anybody. And these viral behaviors can have catastrophic effects. We now know that one of the major causes of the Challenger disaster was the viral epidemic of micro behaviors, little tiny things being ignored, and it became an epidemic. And what we discovered is that in the teams that are immensely successful, there are actually 5 dimensions of respect which are critically important. And these really tap into some of the things that Paul and our other speakers this morning spoke about. What we found was if you don't within the organization have respect for the organization, you are going to have stress, you're going to have poor productivity, you're going to have low retention. And we often don't think about how we build that respect for the organization. It was interesting to hear the words about Santander, how they're really striving to build the reputation of the organization. And what we found is that in organizations where the management of and the leadership of the company put effort into talking the organization up and ensuring that the people who work in it believe in it, those are the ones that are sustainably successful. And very simple tests, you just ask people, what do you do? If they respond, I work for Santander, that tells you something about the respect they have for the organization. If they say, I'm an accountant, that's interesting. They don't hold the organization in respect. It's their personal talent that they identify with. So there was lots and lots of things that you could do to detect this. The second level then was respect for the leadership. And what we're seeing in the current lockdown is the caliber of the leadership is critically important. And we're seeing polarization. Some organizations, the leadership are focusing on surviving just in the lockdown. And I forget which speaker it was said, a lot of organizations, the people know that the leadership have furloughed them with the intent of laying them off later. They're trying to protect the organization's reputation, but the leadership are not committed to long-term sustainability. And in super teams, what we found was the organizations had invested in the caliber of their management. They hadn't promoted the best accountant to head up finance. They hadn't promoted the best salesman to head up sales. They'd actually invested in ensuring that they had people in the leadership roles who understood the importance of people, who understood that it's the people who create the organization's differentiation. It's only the people that can't be copied. So in organizations with high levels of respect for leadership, we saw that much greater sense of loyalty. And again, we saw much lower levels of stress and concern and the side effects. The third level of respect we saw in the super teams was respect for each other. Very simple measure. In the organization that you work with, in the team that you're part of, do people talk to each other or do they talk about each other? When you have a discussion in the meeting, do you go into the washroom and talk about the people who haven't come in with you? Or do you actually talk to them outside of the washroom about how valuable their contribution was and what they did? And really fascinating example of this, and I have to declare here, I'm a rugby fan, not a soccer fan, but I watched intently the work that Gareth Southgate did with the England soccer team. And it was fascinating to note how he created a culture where the team members respected each other. How often, rhetorical question, how often do we see in the soccer teams, it's the one who scores the goal that gets all the credit, the narcissistic player, yeah, and the people who actually put all the blood, sweat and tears into getting the ball up there for them to kick into the goal don't get mentioned at all. So what we noticed was in the teams that were really successful, people cared about each other because of who they were, not just because of what they contributed. The fourth one then was the work. People respected the work, and I thought it was lovely hearing the story of, I forget who it was talking, I lost track of who spoke about what topic, but the person who spoke about creating the business around the values and making sure that what they did was things that they valued. And what we found was in teams that really were sustainably successful and excelled, in every way the work was valued. And for example, in the company that I referred to where the CEO saved it, then brought it down, when I interviewed him, I said, do you know who was on reception this morning? And his comment was, why should I? And it demonstrates in that organization, he created a lack of respect for a lot of the work that got done. He only respected the big ticket salespeople and the big ticket production people. Security guards who were looking after his office in the city of 9/11, he dismissed. Receptionists, he dismissed. And I said, that receptionist is the only person in this company who sees every stakeholder, every customer, every vendor, every employee that comes in this building. They probably know more about this company than you do, sir. So what we found was that in organizations that really had a passion, that got excited, people understood that anything that someone was doing to contribute to the total effort was of value. So the cleaners were valued, the receptionists were valued, the work they did was valued, and as a consequence, they were valued themselves. And I might come back to that one. But this was the critically important one, statistically significant to a scary level. The organizations and the teams that were really exceptional, every individual said that when they left work, they felt they'd been respected? Rhetorical question. Do you, every day when you shut that laptop down, feel that you've been respected? Does everybody who's interacted with you as a result of that interaction feel that they were respected? This was a statistically significant differentiator of superlative performance. So quick poll. I think someone can put up a poll for us to just see which of these you think is the one that perhaps needs the most attention in your team or your organization. So somebody apparently is going to, there we go. So just pick which one. You should be able to pick one of these. Just pick which one you believe is the one that needs most attention in your team. We've got 2 people answered, 3 people. Excellent, we're getting some more answers. Okay, anybody else want to click the poll?
Interesting.
Didn't get a chance to answer.
Oh, yeah. Whoever's managing the poll, could you perhaps relaunch it? It appears to have closed early. There we go. Let's do a quick attempt again. Excellent. There we are. Everybody's getting in now. Fabulous. Yep. Okay, we've got a good sample. Can we just end that and share the results? Good. Okay, so you should be able to see the results now. Again, very, very typical of what we saw. Attention to the individuals. Now, we've been forced to do it in COVID-19 lockdown. What concerns me is, do we have the caliber of leadership and management in organizations to sustain that as we come out? When the pressure gets on, companies realize they've burnt cash flow, companies attempt to create a new normal. And what you're seeing here is what we saw. The caliber of the leadership is probably going to be critically important for achieving that. Okay, let's close that poll down and show it. So let's move on then, because the question then was, why does this matter? What we found was that if you allow these micro behaviors, what happens is, if you don't build respect for the organization, respect for the leadership, respect for the work that gets done, respect for each other, and ensuring that every individual feels respected, you get the classic symptoms that we've been looking at for the last 5 years under the heading of disengagement. Disrespect breeds that disengagement. And these micro behaviors are absolutely viral. What we found was, if you turn the tide, if you start to get improvements, particularly on the individual and the leadership level, although all 5 have a difference, what starts to happen is you get a completely different culture, the sort of culture that Paul was talking about, the sort of culture that Shan was talking about, where people feel part of a community. They actually want to be there. They want to be successful. So the question then was, what does that lead to? And the answer was, we saw significant improvements in employee engagement, significant improvement in productivity without increases in stress and well-being issues, increases in profit, and consequently sustainability. So the question was, what were the behaviors that we saw? What was driving that respect? So when we went back and did causal analysis, one of the critical things we saw was recognition. As individuals, and we may hear something from one of the other speakers later, as individuals, we all want to be recognized. I had a startling example for me. I used to fly a huge amount. I'm delighted now that I don't. But I actually went into the toilets at Newark Airport, Newark International Airport, just west of New York, on a Friday evening at 5:30. Anybody who travels knows you never go into airport toilets on a Friday night at 5:30. In fact, if you're sensible, you never go in an airport at 5:30. I went in and it smelt as though my wife had been there. Lavender. There was no water on the floor. There was no paper lying all over the basins. And in the corner, there was a gentleman with a trolley who clearly was the person responsible for it. I went up to him and I said, "Can I just thank you? This is the cleanest toilets I've ever seen in an airport." He looked at me as though I was actually the FBI or immigration and was going to sort of deport him. And I said, "Don't worry." I said, I just wanted to thank you. Anyway, cut a long story short, I engaged him in conversation. And he shared with me, he'd been there for weeks. He does 10-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Something close to 20,000 passengers go through that terminal every day of the week. I was the first person who'd spoken to him. He said to me, "When people look at me, I am invisible." Can you imagine how that individual felt? That's an extreme one. All I did was have one conversation. 3 weeks approximately later, I went through that same terminal across the concourse, and he called out to me. He'd recognized me in what probably was about 200,000 people. He recognized me and called out, "Hi!" That's the power of recognition. What do we do to recognize people? The second one was empowerment. Letting people do things. One of the reasons that a lot of people are excited by working from home is at last they don't have someone breathing down their neck. They actually have the opportunity to decide something. It's liberating. This concept that if we let people work from home, they won't work, you've probably got the wrong people or the wrong managers. Actually, people who are reasonably skilled, and my experience is the vast majority of people are grossly overqualified for the work that they have to do. Just give them the opportunity to do it. So empowerment was another critical factor. And then supportive feedback. Do you remember this nonsense from HR about we've got to give each other constructive and critical feedback so we can fix our weaknesses? Rhetorical question. Have you ever been given critical feedback and thought, well, that was really nice? It's absolute BS. What we found in the teams that were superlative was, yes, they spotted things that were wrong, they spotted weaknesses, they spotted mistakes, but the conversation was exclusively about what are we going to do going forward. So the feedback was supportive. And again, we've seen the impact of that powerfully in the England rugby team and in the England soccer team. Focusing on people's strengths, sharing talent from one person to another, bringing out the best in each other. And then we found that partnering was important. The number of managers who step in and argue people needed help. You know, well, I saw Jack was struggling, so I stepped in and helped him. Yeah. Or I took part of the work off of her, so that she could do better with what she did. And what managers frequently don't realize is that's intrusive. It suggests to the person that they're incapable. What we found with the super teams was managers had the ability to take off their authority, take off that metaphorical badge, take off that hat that says you're the boss. And metaphorically, they'd stand side by side and hold people's hands and say, okay, how are we going to get this done then? What would you like me to do to help you succeed here? Partnering is fundamentally different, and it creates a huge level of loyalty, and frequently people will take on more and succeed than if you step in and, quote, help them or instruct them. And then expectations. Of course, we need to make people's expectations clear. One of the biggest concerns I have with remote working is we know that when people were working in the office, one of the biggest reasons people cited for leaving was that they didn't know what was expected of them. They always felt uncertain about how their performance was being judged. My big fear is with people working remotely, that's going to increase. So it's really important that we make expectations of people clear. But what we found was the difference in the super teams was in the super teams when people made expectations clear of each other, not necessarily as the boss, but peer to peer and subordinate to boss, etc. They asked one magic question at the end. And that is, okay, Christina, I've just made clear the expectations of you. What's your expectation of me now? What have I got to do to help you succeed? There was a pattern that people said, if I'm going to expect something of you, it's only right that you expect something of me. What is that? And frequently people said, no, nothing. I'm fine. I can get on with it. But mentally, the fact that they'd been given permission and told, tell me what you need, had a dramatic effect on their engagement and their performance. And then one that everyone this morning spoke about was consideration. Yeah, if someone is doing the work, who cares that they've actually got the dog in the background? If someone's actually doing the work, who cares that they didn't comb their hair this morning? Yeah, so there's something about, in the super teams, people demonstrated consideration, even to the point where managers would occasionally take risks, not fiduciary risks, legal risks, or procedural risks, but they would occasionally, let's say, bend the rules because an individual needed to. You know, some of these rules about you've got to work 9 to 5, you can't take time off between 9 and 10 o'clock, and all this stuff. Managers would say, okay, I understand that your father's ill, that you need to go and see the doctor and get something for him. Go, I'll cover for you. That you can't take the manager's salary and not do the job. What we found was huge levels of demonstration of consideration. People knew that if they needed an exception, they'd get it. And they didn't go, well, you know, I didn't get that treatment. You didn't get that whining and bickering because someone got preferential treatment. So that was a key one. And then the last one was trust. And a lot of managers tell me they trust their staff. I let them do things. And I say, no, you only let them do what you know they can do. That's not trust. Trust is when you let people try things when you haven't got a clue whether they can do it. And with all due respect, if you've been promoted in your career, somebody at some time probably trusted you. Guess what? Now it's your turn. So what we found was in the super teams, supervisors, managers, leaders, they understood the importance of trust and making sure people knew that they were trusted. And that meant, of course, they had to come back occasionally and recognize people for effort rather than success, because it doesn't always work. So that's what we found. So again, quick poll. We should have a quick poll for you to pick which one of those 7 do you think you could polish most in your organization. So have we got that poll, please? I don't know who's supporting me. Is it Margaret? Or here we go. So again, which one do you think needs the most attention? And then I'll tell you if it matches the research that we came across. Okay, we're getting lots of results. Few more. Okay, shall we just end that and share the results? Yeah, so what we see is it varies tremendously across organizations, but interestingly, consideration has not popped up, and I think that might be the COVID effect. What we found in our research was recognition, supportive feedback, and consideration were the 3 that seemed to need the most improvement. So again, rhetorical question for you. Which of these would you like to work on? Which would you feel would give you most value? So my time is running up. I'm quite happy to pick any questions or take any questions if anyone has them. I've got the chat box open so that I can see it. Or if you want to unmute, we're a smaller group now. I'd be happy to take any questions.
I'm just wondering, Clinton, if there's certain industries that are more amenable to already embracing those sort of, the respect factors.
It's a great question, Jazz. I mean, we certainly found that the more service type industries are more amenable to this. In a sense, almost if you're running a service industry, some of these start to become part of the mindset. Although there are some huge exceptions. We saw some huge exceptions in, unfortunately, privately managed care homes, for example. We found real polarization in some of those, but we found strong evidence there. Interestingly, we found very high levels of respect within certainly startup IT type companies. And we've seen a fabulous example of this in And Digital this morning. And there's something there about people being really confident in their talent, having an exciting job to do. And I think that helps make it easier. What was interesting is as they become more stable, as they come out of the startup mode, what we found was that often the managerial structure, the procedures, and the HR policies started to come in and actually started to eat away at that passion and that emotion, and particularly the recognition and the individual respect started to slip. Any other comments or questions?
We got 2 minutes before we start the next session, so they'll have to be quick, or they can put their comments in the chat box and we can share that with Clinton later on.
Okay, if we haven't got any, I have actually provided 3 things that you'll have access to. One is the slide deck. The second one is a survey that Dr. Marciano and I developed, which you can use within your team to get the conversation going, and feel free to use that. So you can use that within your organizations freely. And we also gave you a list of the 25 most disrespectful behaviors we came across. And many of us actually were appalled to find how many of them we actually demonstrate ourselves. So, make sure you've got a scotch or a coffee handy when you check that list yourself. Thank you, Margaret. Real pleasure to join you all. Looking forward to the next talk.